From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez and this is From the South, the morning news brief on Telesur English. We start this new edition right now. From the United Nations to Central America, the Caribbean and Africa, there has been outrage after President Donald Trump apparently made insulting remarks about immigrants from those areas. Referring to African countries including Nigeria, as well as El Salvador and Haiti, Trump apparently asks members of the U.S. Congress, why are we having all these people from shithole countries come here? He was discussing his moves to suspend temporary protection status and the DACA program.
Calling African countries shithole is really very bad. And I think every African country should just learn from this and probably just stay in their country and work with their resources.
We demand that Donald Trump apologize before the entire African continent, as well as before Haiti, the country whose blood was shed and which lent its minds and bodies to liberate the United States itself from slavery.
A group of Salvadoran migrants arrived back in their home country on Thursday after being deported from the United States. Just days ago, President Trump announced that 200,000 migrants from El Salvador might have to go home because he was canceling their temporary protection status, or TPS.
Here in the country I can't find, well, since I can't find work, I can't find a meaning to life here. I'm afraid to go to any town because as soon as I go out, people ask me if I'm a Mara, if this or if that. I feel like I'm in danger here and well, in the end, like I said, I want to reunite with my family again, since I don't want to lose them. I want to fight until the end.
Talks will continue this Friday in the Dominican Republic between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. Delegations from both sides arrived for the dialogue on Thursday. They have reported progress since the last round in December, but say that they won't be commenting further until a deal is reached. There are 6 points on this agenda which seeks to address political and economic conflict in the country. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio has criticized the Venezuelan dialogue process. On Twitter, the Republican senator said Venezuela has a long history of luring the opposition to negotiations, but progress is never made, and concessions are usually superficial. He added that concessions made can easily be taken away. Rubio also said U.S. sanctions will not be lifted, even if President Maduro can get the opposition to lobby for it. Delcy Rodriguez, the president of the Venezuelan National Constituent Assembly, has rejected these comments. She accused Senator Rubio of trying to sabotage the process with vulgar and improper comments. She says the Venezuelan people will display democracy and dignity. The Assembly's president also had words for the Chilean Foreign Minister Heraldo Muñoz, who said the dialogue should stop if there aren't immediate results. Rodriguez said Mr. Muñoz is opting for the sad back door and is serving low U.S. interests. Officials from Venezuela and Netherlands are due to meet this Friday to seek a solution to the problem of smuggling to the islands of Aruba, Curaçao, and Bonaire. Smuggled Venezuelan goods are currently freely available on Aruban store shelves. Our correspondent Marilyn Garcia has the story.
On the shelves of some Aruban supermarkets, you can find smuggled Venezuelan products. This jar of mayo, for example, is dated November 11, 2017, a date when mayo could not be found in Venezuelan stores. You can also find Venezuelan tuna, which over there costs 400,000 bolívares, but here it is sold for $2. Closing the border due to contraband has also affected legal trade, such as fruit and vegetable commerce.
We have to buy American products, which are too expensive in comparison to Venezuelan products, which are also better. The entire island is affected. American products cost 3 times as much. We would pay $25 for a box of Venezuelan lemons. If we buy American, they cost between $65 and $70.
Aruba's government banned sales of uncertified copper originated from Venezuela. But copper is hardly the only issue. Gold being sold in jewelry stores in Aruba and Curaçao is also part of the contraband. These topics will be discussed on Friday by the affected governments.
If there is no conversation, nothing can be resolved. It's like a disagreement between a mother and her child. The only way to resolve it is to have a conversation.
Curaçao is a main gold exporter, despite the fact it possesses no gold mines. One of the main topics to be discussed on Friday is how to maintain a healthy and mutually beneficial trade relationship between both nations.
And thousands of people took to the streets in Peru on Thursday evening to protest against the pardon of the former leader Alberto Fujimori. The march in Lima, called by trade unions and by relatives of the victims of several massacres under the Fujimori government in the 1990s, was one of the largest protests so far. The demonstrators denounced the deal done between President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski and members of the Fujimori family to block moves to impeach him.
The pardon is an insult. As they say, this man, Alberto Fujimori, committed too many misdeeds, caused the country too much harm. He hasn't repented, and nevertheless, he enjoys complete freedom.
Today we came out to renew our promise to the fight, to persist until this pardon is reverted, until the main person responsible for the death of our relatives is back in jail.
My sister is one of the victims of the dictatorial regime of Alberto Fujimori. We are here because after years of pursuing justice, this government is making a mockery of us and our right to justice. We will stay on here. We will stay in the streets. We will stay in the courts, all the places that are necessary to be able to recover the rights that have been gained through firm sentences in honor of our family members. We will make no agreement with corruption. We will not negotiate over impunity that this government wants to impose on us.
First, we are demanding that the ex-president Alberto Fujimori, the war criminal, the most corrupt president in the country, the seventh most corrupt in the world, ought to go back to jail. In addition, that the corruption in the public sector must be stopped. There ought to be a large investigation, and those who are involved with the corruption ought to go to jail.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Chile is getting ready to receive Pope Francis, but some say that this focus is a strategy planned by President Michelle Bachelet to divert attention from the low popularity rates that she's ending her ruling period on. Paola Dragnish with more.
This may be the perfect ending for a government that ends with less than 30% approval. President Bachelet will give away the presidential band with the lowest popularity rates since the return to democracy.
This is clearly a big deal for Bachelet, with Bachelet and because of Bachelet. This visit was organized for 6 months. At least she managed to have a visit from the Pope, and it shows good signs of negotiation and political resource-building skills in an international scale.
But this also affects the inner politics, worrying the social movements because the abortion and gender identity laws are just two of the initiatives started by Bachelet in one of the most progressive governments since the return to democracy.
What is interesting here is that at the end of this government, which tried to promote the people's rights in its agenda, is that what she's doing looks like some sort of apology before ending its time in power. So it brings the Pope as an attempt to calm down this chaos in society.
Chaos which may grow stronger with the Pope's visit and later the arrival to power of the right-winged Sebastián Piñera.
She doesn't care too much about what comes next. That's why conservative groups are so happy, because this visit is totally empty. Bachelet literally created a Troy horse against herself. She will bring an empty visit to be filled by Vatican as it wishes.
Y donde el Vaticano puede llenarlo desde allá como quieran.
And that is what social movements fear, to go backwards in a matter of rights.
This is a guarantee which will be reflected in the implementation of public policies, in the way they'll debate about pending matters. The law for sexual and reproductive rights was never presented, and egalitarian marriage is still not a clear issue.
Pero ojo.
But let's remember that Pope Francis has two important qualities. He is a Jesuit and he is a Peronist. So a pope like that might be a little unpredictable. He may come and do a couple of moves and discomfort the religious elite.
The only remaining hope is what the Pope can do from a distance, in a country opposed to the church elite, and that will receive him under security standards never seen before in Chile.
Protesters in 16 Brazilian cities have taken to the streets to reject a hike in transportation prices. More than 9,000 people are expected to demonstrate. Members of the Free Press movement organized a massive protest in 15 other cities across 6 states, including Goiás, Pernambuco, and Rio de Janeiro. The city of Sao Paulo 5 days ago raised prices on public buses, the metro, and trains by 20 cents. Our correspondent Ignacio Lemus has more.
Just happened in 2013. Public transit fares are increasing once again, and people in Sao Paulo are taking to the streets to protest this measure. The demonstrations were organized by students and the Pase Libre movement. The Sin Miedo movement, one of the biggest social and trade union movements in the city, is also joining the protest. They are opposing an increase which means Brazilians will have to pay more than $1 to take the bus in one of the most important cities of the country, an increase that the government is trying to introduce while people are enjoying the summer holiday. The groups are also denouncing a cut in the number of bus lines in Sao Paulo, a decision made by the mayor of the city, and the privatization of a second subway line. That decision was made by the governor of the state, with the support of the federal government of Michel Temer, to reduce the debt the state has with the federal government. Protesters are asking the Sao Paulo government to put a stop to this measure, arguing there are more than 14 million unemployed people in Brazil who have a hard time paying the current transport fares.
That was Ignacio Lemus from Sao Paulo. 8 out of 10 Nicaraguans reject the Nica Act law promoted by Washington, accusing it of being invasive and harmful for the country's economy. We have more in the next story.
Marvin is part of the 80% of Nicaraguans against the Nica Act, a law promoted by the U.S., which, if approved in Washington, may move to impose economic sanctions to Nicaragua.
Of course I oppose this law. It is always the bigger ones who try to step on the small people without caring about anything. They just care about their rights, and that affects us. Capitalism affects us. It only comes to destroy the few things that we can still build.
The National Assembly, just like the people of the country, is opposed to the law and states that a small part of the opposition is promoting this law project.
One more for the empire, which is always supported by the bad sons of our country, who beg for what they can have. They ruled the state for 16 years, and all we got was more poverty, less work, less health, less education. Therefore, the people in general are strong when saying no to the Nica Act.
If the law is approved by Donald Trump, it may affect investments made by the government in social projects related to health, education, and infrastructure around the whole country, but the labor union thinks they are stronger if they work together.
Unfortunately, it will be approved, but I don't know when. Meanwhile, the enemies are still working on that, as well as the inner enemies in Nicaragua who asked to approve the law. We will keep working and will organize and strengthen because we know this has political and economic goals. So we will do our job because we are generators and wealth producers.
The last polls indicate that only 9% of people agree with the Nica Act, which is a law project that for most of the people is both intrusive and damaging to democracy.
The Ecuadorian government has granted citizenship to Julian Assange hours after the British government refused to grant diplomatic status to the WikiLeaks founder. Foreign Minister Maria Fernanda Espinosa confirmed the granting of Ecuadorian citizenship to Assange on December 12th, in an attempt that she called to find a dignified solution to his 5.5-year imprisonment at the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
Another alternative refers to the naturalization process of Mr. Assange. He made a request to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility for his naturalization on September 16, 2017. Once, of course, he had remained as a person under international protection for around 5.5 years under the jurisdiction of the Ecuadorian state in its embassy in London. This naturalization was granted on December 12, 2017. On December 20th, the Foreign Ministry, through its embassy in London, requested the British Ministry of Foreign Affairs to consider the accreditation of Mr. Assange as a diplomatic agent in the mission of Ecuador in the United Kingdom. That request was denied on December 21st. In view of the good relations we have with the United Kingdom, we declined that option.
In Paraguay, the Women's Integral Protection Law against violence has come into effect, but the feminist movement recognizes that there is still a lot more to do. They have to address violence against women, although they say this does show progress.
Before this new law, Paraguay didn't recognize feminicide in their penal code, and according to feminist lawyer Sonia von Lepel, the country had already received recommendations from the Committee of the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.
One of the important removals that the law had was the withdrawal of the theoretical foundation of the word gender, and this prevents a deeper approach to the problems of femicide in the country.
For the feminist movement, the legal tool is a progress, but they criticize that conservative legislators remove the word gender from the final text, because it limits solving the problem.
One of the important removals that the law had was the withdrawal of the theoretical foundation of the word gender, and this prevents a deeper approach to the problems of feminicide in the country.
The law that went into effect applies to women, without any kind of discrimination, to face facts or omissions that involve any type of violence. According to official data, there were 53 feminicides in 2017 and 2 in 2018.
It has made progress. It has its flaws from our point of view. For instance, for us, it's very important that it focuses on human rights and gender.
The feminist movement announced that they will join the International Women's March on March 8th, Working Women's Day, with demonstrations and debates. They will continue demanding the end of discrimination and violence.
Several reactions follow the Colombian government's decision to withdraw its negotiating team from peace talks with the National Liberation Army. The talks were set to resume in Quito, Ecuador. Our correspondent Lorena Hoyos has more.
In the last hours, several congressmen have spoken about the tension between the ELN and the government. They have asked the Congress Peace Commission to analyze the situation and to find a way to act as a mediator if both sides decide to meet again in Quito, Ecuador. Civilians have insisted that the ELN and the government have to overcome the difficulties that happened in the last days and need to be fixed at the dialogue table. They are asking both sides to resume the negotiation process so they can find a solution to the tensions. The people are also asking the sides to define a new mechanism that can allow another bilateral ceasefire. Colombia is currently immersed in an election process with votes set to take place in summer. Presidential candidates from the right have said that the government should put an end to the negotiations and to intensify the war against the ELN. But the center and the left-wing parties are supporting the peace process and also want both sides to return to Ecuador to advance the dialogues. General Alberto Mejia, commander of the army, said that the government has ordered the military to intensify actions against the ELN. The communities affected by the armed conflict have said the new military actions are having deep consequences, especially regarding forced displacement of civilians, and they insist the only way to end this war is with dialogue.
That was Lorena Hoyos from Bogotá. A recent decision by Mexican officials to train students to deal with shootings inside schools has become controversial. Our correspondent in Mexico City, Pablo Perez, has the story.
25 million students have returned to classes in Mexico after the end of the year holidays, and many will face shooting drills like this. Rising due to these exercises in high schools in South Baja California.
Pues a mí la verdad me parece erróneo, ¿no?
I think it's wrong, that it's not relevant at this moment. Even the teachers disagree with all of it.
Pues que se tiren al suelo.
Citizens criticized the proposal by the Education Secretariat of the Safe Education Program for Mexico City, when the main demands from schools are rebuilding efforts after the earthquake in September destroyed several schools and paralyzed classes. But what they do agree on is that the violence in the streets of Mexico has reached the schools. Analysts, however, are worried about a federal protocol to take place in cases of violence.
Son niveles de estrés y de ansiedad.
These are overwhelming levels of stress and anxiety for children. If we are dealing with situations that could be potentially damaging for their mental health, in this sense, the proposed solution could be worse than the social problem we have.
De los niños y las niñas, ¿no?
The problem, he says, is real and therefore should be presented in a thoughtful way to the students.
Eso tiene que ver con la forma en la que...
This has to do with the way in which we provide information, the way in which we educate them, in making it clear why we need to implement a protocol so rough as preparing for a shooting.
Para balaceras.
2017 was the most violent year in Mexico, with almost 28,000 homicide victims, from which 1 out of 10 was a minor.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Dozens of activists staged an anti-Guantanamo rally outside of the White House on Thursday in Washington, D.C., on the 16th anniversary of the opening of the Guantanamo prison camps. Activists were dressed in orange jumpsuits, similar to those worn by Guantanamo inmates, and bore signs reading 41 for the 41 Muslim men that are still being held within the detention camp. Several protesters were detained.
Guantanamo is about institutionalized Islamophobia. Guantanamo is about the lengths to which the U.S. government will go to criminalize our identity. Right. Let's not forget that. So when we come here year after year after year, it's because Guantanamo needs to be shut down. Right. It's because we know that our rights are at risk. It's because we know that Trump could easily decide to put yet more Muslims in that prison.
The Guantanamo prison is a U.S. facility established to hold detainees swept out under the so-called War on Terror for former President George W. Bush.
In response to the 9/11 attacks in 2001 and subsequent military operations by the United States in Afghanistan, existing migrant detention facilities at Guantanamo were repurposed as an offshore prison for captives in the War on Terror. It was intentionally established on a U.S. naval base on the tip of Cuba that George W. Bush's lawyers argued was beyond the reach of U.S. law, which means detainees could be denied legal protection.
They are inherently unfair. They are set up to be a second-class system of justice. So I think that they are inherently flawed and will not deliver fairness for either side.
Shortly after his inauguration in 2009, President Barack Obama signed an executive order to close the facility. But even at the end of his term in 2017, Guantanamo remained in operation.
I continue to believe that Guantanamo is a recruitment tool for terrorist organizations, that it clouds and sours some of the counterterrorism cooperation that we need to engage in. And it's not necessary, and it's hugely expensive for U.S. taxpayers.
Although authorities claim prisoners were held in humane conditions, reports surfaced showing quite the opposite. There were accounts of intense torture and sexual humiliation, pushing dozens of prisoners to suicide. Kako, an Afghan prisoner who was recently released from Guantanamo, recounts the horrors he faced.
This prison is changing the minds of people like my friend from the prison and many more. This prison is the worst place, and I think it is better to shut it down. To stabilize those who were released from Guantanamo, there should be a compensation for them.
Despite a loud campaign by legal activists and scholars, the Bush administration insisted that prisoners were not eligible to be tried by the normal channels used by civilian and military courts. However, after much outcry, in 2008, the United States Supreme Court ruled that detainees had the right of access to federal courts. Still, lawyers for Guantanamo inmates say the ruling came a little too late.
Issues like kind of physical inhumanity and abuse that existed in the earlier years, I think for the majority of the men now, is not really the main problem. It is the condition of, after over 12 years of detention without charge, still not knowing whether or if you are going home.
At the height of the so-called war on terror, Guantanamo held as many as 780 prisoners. The Bush administration transferred over 500 detainees out of the prison, while the Obama administration moved almost 200 inmates. Today, 41 prisoners still remain, not knowing if they will ever see freedom or their families.
Now let's have a look at some other stories making headlines around the world.
A massive cholera vaccination campaign is underway in the Zambian capital, Lusaka, to contain an outbreak that has left more than 60 people dead and almost 3,000 affected in recent months. The president of Zambia has called the military to help in dealing with this alarming situation.
I think it's going to help a lot of people because, as you can see, a large number of people have turned up to get vaccinated against cholera because this is a very deadly disease.
Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang has signed billions of dollars of worth investment deal with its ally Cambodia during a visit to the Southeast Asian nation. Both the countries signed 19 aid and investment pacts for projects including highway and airport development and the launch of Cambodia's first communications satellite. Myanmar's army has admitted for the first time that its soldiers were involved in unlawfully killing Rohingya Muslims in recent violence in Rakhine State. Myanmar has been accused of carrying out ethnic cleansing in Rakhine State. More than 650,000 Rohingya have fled to neighboring Bangladesh since violence erupted 6 months ago. A group of demonstrators have gathered in the Tunisian capital Tunis to demand the release of hundreds arrested in nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Around 600 people have been arrested during the mobilizations across the country over higher taxes and high prices. Unemployment nationally exceeds 15% and is much higher in some marginalized regions of the interior. Activists campaigning on behalf of detained pro-independence Catalan leaders gave away 20,000 banners reading freedom to FC Barcelona fans ahead of the team's home game against Celta Vigo at the NOU Camp Stadium.
And with this, we've come to the end of this morning news brief. This and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Sign of resistance to hatred and injustice, Bill Fletcher Jr. conducts a discussion and analysis space to reveal the